Testing, testing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Are we live? Yes, we are. Today I'm going to be reading the Stormlight series by Brandon Sanderson. And the first book is The Way of Kings, the Stormlight Archive. I really don't want to start reading without no one in the room. I'm just going to start either way, because it's my first time reading a book. Because this is my first time reading a book. It's not exactly enjoyable reading a book you've already read before on stream. Because you've already heard before. You've already read it before. But it's way more fun to read a new book and react to it live. So, The Way of Kings, Chapter 1, The Prelude. The Stormlight Archive. Karlach rounded a rocky stone ridge and stumbled to a stop before the body of a dying Thunderclass. The enormous stone base lay on its side. Three black protrusions from its chest broken and cracked. The monstrosity was vaguely skeletal in shape, with unnaturally long limbs that sprouted from granite shoulders. The eyes were a deep red spot on the arrowhead face, as if created by a fire burning deep within the stone. They faded. Even after all these centuries, seeing a Thunderclass up close made Karlach shiver. The beast's hand was as long as a man was tall. He'd been killed by hands like this before. It hadn't been pleasant. Of course, dying really was. He rounded the creature, picking his way more carefully across the battlefield. The plain was a place of misshapen rock and stone. Natural pillars rising around him, but littering the ground. Few plants lived here. The stones were shattered, blasted out sections where surge binders had fought. Less frequently, he passed cracked, oddly shaped hollows where Thunderclass had ripped himself free of the stone to join the fray. Many of the bodies around him were human. Many were not, blood mixed, red, orange, violet. The none of the bodies around him stirred. An indistinct haze of sound hung in the air. Moans of pain, cries of grief. It did not seem like the sound of victory. Smoke curled from the occasional patches of growths or heaps of burning corpses. Even some sections of rock smoldered. The dustbringers had done their work well. But I survived, Karlach thought, hand to breast as he hastened to the meeting place. I actually survived this time. That was dangerous. When he died, he was sent back. No choice. When he survived the dissolution, he was supposed to go back as well. Back to that place that he dreaded. Back to that place of pain and fire. What if he just decided not to go? Perilous thoughts, perhaps. Traitorous thoughts. He hastened on his way. The place of meeting was in the shadow of a large rock formation, the spire rising to the sky. As always, the 10 of them had decided upon it before the battle. Survivors would make their way here. Oddly, only one of the others were waiting for him. Jerison. But no, the place of meeting was in the shadow of a large rock formation, a spire rising in the sky. As always, 10 of them had decided upon it before the battle. Survivors made their way here. Oddly, only one of the others was waiting for him, Jezrin. Had the other 8 all died? It was possible. The battle had been so furious this time, one of the worst. The enemy was growing increasingly tenacious. But no, Kalak frowned as he stepped up to the base of the spire. 7 magnificent swords stood proudly here, drawing first point into the stone ground. It was a masterly work of art, flowing in design, inscribed with glyphs and patterns. He recognized each one. If their masters had died, the blades would have vanished. These blades were weapons of power beyond even shard blades. These were unique, precious. Jezrin stood outside the ring of swords, looking eastward. Jezrin! The figure in white and blue glanced towards him. Even after all these centuries, Jezrin looked young, like a man barely into his 30th year. His short black beard was neatly trimmed, though his once fine clothing was scorched and stained with blood. The figure in white and blue glanced towards him. After all these centuries, Jezrin looked young, like a man barely into the 30th year. His short black beard was neatly trimmed, though his once fine clothing was scorched and stained with blood. He folded his arms behind his back as he turned to Kalak. "What is this, Jezrin?" Kalak asked. "Where are the others?" "Departed," Jezrin's voice. "Departed." Jezrin's voice was calm, deep, regal. Though he hadn't worn a crown in centuries, his royal manner lingered. He always seemed to know what to do. "You might call it a miracle. Only one of us died this time." "Talen," Kalak said, "was the only blade unaccounted for." "Yes, he died opening the passage by the northern waterway." Kalak nodded. Tal had a tendency to choose seemingly hopeless fights and win them. It had a tendency to die in the process. He would be back now in the place where they went between desolations. The place of nightmares. Kalak found himself shaking. When had he become so weak? "Jezrin, I can't return this time," Kalak whispered the words, stepping up and gripping the other man's arm. "I can't." Kalak felt something within him break at the admission. How long had it been? Centuries, perhaps? Millennia? Of torture? It was so hard to keep track. Those fires, those hooks, digging into his flesh anew, each day. Popcorn David, I don't know what that is. Searing the skin of his arm, then burning the fat, then driving to the bone. He could smell it. Almighty could smell it. "Leave your sword," Jezrin said. "What?" Jezrin nodded to the ring of weapons. "I was chosen to wait for you. We weren't certain if you had survived. A decision has been made. It's time for the oath pact to end." Kalak felt a sharp stab of horror. What would that do? Isha believes that so long as there is one of us still bound to the oath pact, it may be enough. There's a chance we might end the cycle of desolation. Kalak looked into the mortal king's eyes. Black smoke rose from the small patch to their left. Groans of the dying haunted them from behind. There in Jedrin's eyes, Kalak saw anguish and grief. Perhaps even cowardice. Just a man hanging from a cliff by a thread. Almighty above, Kalak thought. You're broken too, aren't you? They all were. Kalak turned and walked to the side, where a low ridge overlooked part of the battlefield. There were so many corpses, and among them walked 11. Men in primitive wraps, carrying spears topped by bronze heads. Juxtaposed between them were others in gleaming plate armor. One group walked past, 4 men in their ragged tanned skins, or shoddy leather, joining a powerful figure in beautiful silver plates. Amazingly intricate. Such a contrast. Jedrin stepped up beside him. They see us as divinities, Kalak whispered. They reply upon us, Jedrin. We're all that they have. They have the radiance. That will be enough. Kalak shook his head. He will not remain bound by this. The enemy, he'll find a way around it. You know he will. Perhaps the king of heralds offered no further explanation. And Talm, Kalak asked, the flesh burning, defies the pain over and over and over. Better that one man should suffer than 10. Jesper whispered. I don't think you should be making that decision. It seems so cold, like a shadow, caused by heat and light, falling on someone honorable and true, casting this black imitation behind. Jesper walked back to the ring of swords, his own blade formed in his hands, appearing from mist, wet with condensation. It has been decided, Kalak. We will go our ways, and we will not seek one. We will go our ways, and we will not seek out one another. Our blades must be left. The oath spark ends now. He lifted the sword and rammed it to the stone with the other 7. Jesper hesitated, looking at the sword, then bowed his head and turned away, as if ashamed. We choose the burden willingly, but we can choose to drop it if we wish. What do we tell the people, Jedrin? Kalak asked. What will they say of this day? It's simple, Jedrin said, walking away. We'll tell them that they finally won. It's an easy enough lie. Who knows? Maybe it will turn out to be true. Kalak watched Jedrin depart from the burned landscape. Finally, he summoned his own blade and slammed it into the stone beside the other 8. He turned and walked in the opposite direction from Jedrin. And yet he could not help glancing back at the ring of swords, and the single open spot, the place where the 10th sword should have gone. The one of them who was lost, the one they had abandoned. Forgive us, Kalak thought, and left. Book 1, The Love of Kings. 4,500 years later. Ooh. It's a long time. The love of men is a frigid thing, a mountain stream only 3 steps away from the ice, where he is, O storm father, where he is. It is but 1,000 days, and the hailstorm comes. Clocked on the first day of the week of Pala, of the month Shash, of the year 1171, 31 seconds before death. So the subject was a dark-eyed pregnant woman of middle years. The child did not survive. Zet, son of Valno, Truthless of Shinova, wore white on the day he was to kill a king. The white clothing was a Parshendi tradition, foreign to him, but he did this as his masters required, did not ask for an explanation. Was good random. Ready for the liberator. He sat in the large stone room, baked by enormous fire pits and a cast of garish lights upon revelers, causing beads of sweat to form on their skins as they danced and drank, and yelled and sang and clapped. Some fell to the ground red-faced, the revelry too much for them, the stomach proving to be inferior wineskins. They looked as if they were dead, at least until their friends carried them out of the feast all to wait in beds. Zest did not sway to the drums, drink the sapphire wine, or stand to dance. He sat on the bench at the back, a still servant in white robes. Few at the treaty signing celebration noticed him. He was just a servant, and she noticed it with no. Most out here in the East thought Seth's kind were docile and harmless. They were generally right. The drummers began anew with him. The beat shook Zeth like a quartet of thumping hearts, pumping waves of invisible blood through the room. Zeth's masters were dismissed as savages by those who in more civilized kingdoms sat at their own tables. They were men with skin of black marble with red, Parshendi, they were named, cousins to the more docile servant people known as Pashmen in most of the world. An oddity, they did not call themselves Parshendi. This was the Alethi name for them. It meant roughly, Pashmen who can think. Neither side seems to see that as an insult. The Parshendi had brought the musicians. The first, the Alethi light eyes, had been hesitant. To them, drums were a base instrument of the common, dark-eyed people. But wine was a great assassin of both tradition and propriety. And now the Alethi elite danced with abandon. Zed stood and began to make his way through the room. The revelry had lasted long. Even the king had retired hours ago, but then many still celebrated. As he walked, Zed was forced to step around Delena Coelen, the king's own brother, who slumped drunken at a small table. The aging but powerfully built man kept waving away, those who tried to encourage him to bed. Where was Jashna, the king's daughter? Iloka, the king's son and heir, sat at the table, rolling a fist in his father's absence. He was in conversation with two men. Dark-skinned Azishman had an odd patch of pale skin on his cheek, and a thinner Alethi-looking man kept glancing over his shoulder. The air's feasting companions were unimportant. They stayed away from the air, skirting the sides of the room, passing the drummers, music spring zipped through the air around them. The tiny spirit taking the form of spinning translucent ribbons. As Zeth passed drummers, they noted him. They would withdraw soon, along with all of the other Parshendi. They did not seem offended. They did not seem angry. And they were going to break their treaty of only a few hours. It made no sense. But Zeth did not ask questions. At the edge of the room, passed rows of unwavering azure lights that bulged out where the walls met the floor. They held sapphires infused with stormlight. Profane. How could the men of the lands use something so sacred for mere illumination? Worse, the Alethi's colors were said to be close to creating new shard blades. Zeth hoped that was just wishful boasting, for if it did happen, the world would be changed. likely in a way that ended with people in all countries from distant Telnir to towering Jakid looking at Letty to their children. They were grand people, these Aleti, even drunk. There was a natural nobility to them, tall and well made. The men dressed in dark silk coats that buttoned down the sides of the chest and were elaborately embroidered in silver or gold. Each one looked a general on the field. The women were even more splendid. They wore grand silk dresses, tightly fitted, the bright colors in contrast to the dark tones favored by the men. The left sleeve of each dress was longer than the right one, covering the hand. Aleti had an odd sense of propriety. Their pure black hair was pinned up top to their heads, either in intricate weavings of braids or in loose piles. It was often woven with gold ribbons or ornaments, along with gems that glowed with stormlights. Beautiful, profane. Beautiful. Profane, but beautiful. That left the feasting chambers behind. Just outside, we passed a doorway into the beggar's feast. It was an Aleti tradition, a room where some of the poorest men and women in the city were given a feast complementing that of the king and his guests. A man with a long grey and black beard slumped in the doorway, smiling foolishly, though whether from wine or of a weak mind, Zed could not tell. "Have you seen me?" the man asked, with slurred speech. He laughed, then began to speak in gibberish, reaching for a wineskin. So it was drink after all. Then brushed by, continued past the line of statues depicting the 10 heralds from ancient Vorian theology. Jezret, Ishi, Kalek, Lenat, counted off each one, and realized there was only one. Realized that there were only 9 here. One was conspicuously missing. Why had the Shalash statue been removed? King Gavler was said to be very devout in his Vorian worship. Too devout, for some people's standard. My microphone is awful. Hold on. Let me check my microphone out. What do you mean by it's awful? Microphone. Hold on. There's no drop frame. Join the activities. Is it that bad that my I don't know. It sounds fine in my end, but yeah, I'll try to listen to my stream to see how bad it is. They all were curved to the right, running around the perimeter of the domed palace. They were on the king's floor, 2 levels up, surrounded by rock walls. Ceiling and floor. That was profane. Stone was not to be trod upon, but what was he to do? He was ruthless. He did as his masters demanded. Today that included wearing loose white trousers tied to the waist with a rope, and over them a filmy shirt with long sleeves. What do you mean by hard to follow? Like, am I like dropping? So I don't seem to be having any dropped frame in my stream. Maybe Let me see. I'm gonna see if I can fix it. Maybe it's. Hold on. Issue with drop frame. Hmm. Yeah, it's probably my gain thing. I'm gonna try to increase the gain. No, I mean, if you guys can't hear my voice, then it's kind of pointless for me to keep waiting. Where was I? Today, that included white, loose white trousers tied to the waist with a rope, and over them a female shirt with long sleeves, open at the front. White clothing for a killer was the tradition among the Pashandi. Although Zest was not asked, his masters had explained why. White to be bold, white to not blend to the night, white to give warning. For if you were to assassinate a man, you were entitled to see you coming. Zed turned right, taking the hallway directly toward the king's chambers. Touches burnt on the walls, the light unsatisfying to him. A meal of thin brought after a long fast. Tiny flame springs danced around them, like insects made solely of congealed light. The torches were useless to him. He reached for his pouch, and the fears contained, but hesitated when he saw more of the blue light ahead. A pair of stormlight lamps hanging on the walls. Brilliant sapphires glowing at the heart. Zeth walked up to one of these, holding out his hands to cup it around the glass-shrouded gemstone. You dear, a voice called in Aleti. There were two guards in the intersection. Double guard, for there were savages abroad in Colina this night. True, those savages were supposed to be allies now, but alliances could be shallow things indeed. This one wouldn't last the hour. Zeth looked as the two guards approached. They carried spears. They weren't light eyes, and would therefore forbidding the sword. Their painted red breastplates were ornate. However, as with their helms, they might be dark-eyed, but they were high-ranking citizens with honored positions in the royal guard. Stopping a few feet away, the guard at the front gestured with his spear. "Go on now, this is no place for you." He had tan and let his skin, with a thin mustache that ran all the way around his mouth, becoming the beard at the bottom. Zed didn't move. "Well," the guard said, "what are you waiting for?" Zed breathed in deeply, drawing forward the stormlight. It streamed into him, siphoning from the twin sapphire lamps on the walls, sucking as if by his deep inhalation. The stormlight raged inside of him, and the hallway suddenly grew darker, falling to shade like a hilltop cut off from the sun by a transient cloud. Zed could feel the light's warmth, its fury, like a tempest that had been injected directly into his veins. The power of it was invigorating but dangerous. It pushed him to act, to move, to strike. Holding his breath, he clung to the stormlight. He could still feel it leaking out. Stormlight could be held for only a short time, a few minutes at most. He clicked away. The human body too porous a container. The Republic by Plato. 2 chapters in. Now try reading the Republic by Plato if you want me to. He had heard that the Void Bringers could hold it in perfectly. But then, did they even exist? His punishment declared that they didn't. His honor demanded that they did. Afire with all the energy, Zed turned to the guards. They could see that he was licking stormlight, wisps of it curling from his skin like limited smoke. The lead guard squinted, frowning. Zed was sure the man had never seen anything like it before. As far as he knew, Zed had killed every stone walker I'd ever seen. Zed had killed every stone walker I'd ever seen what he could do. What are you? The guard's voice had lost its certainty. Spirit of man. What am I? Zed whispered. A bit of light came from his lips as he spoke. As he looked past the man down the long hallway. "I'm sorry." Zed blinked, latching himself to that distant point down the hallway. Stormlight reached from him in a flash, chilling his skin, and the ground immediately stopped pulling him downward. Instead, it was pulled toward a distant point. It was as if to him that direction had suddenly become down. This was the basic lashing, first of his 3 kinds of lashing, giving the ability to manipulate whatever force, spring or god, it was that held men to the ground. With his lashing, he could bind people or objects to different surfaces or in different directions. From Zed's perspective, the hallway was now a deep shaft down which was falling, and the 2 guards stood on one of the sides. They were shocked when Zed's feet hit them, one for each face, throwing them over. Zed shifted his view and lashed himself to the floor. Light leaked from him. The floor of the hallway again became down, and he landed between the guards, clothes crackling and dropping flakes of frost. He rose, beginning the process of summoning his shard blade. One of the guards fumbled for his spear, so he reached down, touching the soldier's shoulder while looking up. He focused on the points above him while willing the light out of his body and into the guard, latching the poor man to the ceiling. The guard yelped in shock as all became down for him, light trailing from his form. He crashed into the ceiling and dropped the spear. It was not lashed directly and clattered back down to the floor instead. To kill was the greatest sin, and yet here Zed stood, truthless, profanely walking in stones used for building and would not end. As truthless, there was only one life he could. As truthless, there was only one life he was forbidden to take, and that was his own. It's weird. You're allowed to kill everyone else, but not you. Okay, good excuse. At the 10th beat of his heart, his sharp blade dropped into his waiting hand. It formed as if condensing from mist, water beading along the metal length. His sharp blade was long and thin, edged on both sides, smaller than most others. Death swept it out, carving a line in the stone floor and passing through the second guard's neck. As always, the sharp blade killed hardly, though it cut easily through stone, steel, or anything inanimate. The metal first when it touched living skin. It traveled through the guard's neck without leaving a mark, but once it did, the man's eyes smoked and burned. They blackened, shriveling up in his head, and he slumped forward, dead. His sharp blade did not cut living flesh, it severed the soul itself. Above the first guard, gasp, it managed to get to his feet, even though they were planted on the ceiling in the hallway. Shadbearer, he shouted. A Shadbearer assault the king's hall. To arms! Finally, Zed's thought. Zed's use of stormlight was unfamiliar to the guards, but they knew a sharp blade when they saw one. Zed bent down and picked up the spear that had fallen from above. As he did so, he released the breath he had been holding since he joined the stormlight. It sustained him while he held it, but those two lanterns hadn't contained much of it. He would need to breathe again soon. The light began to leak away more quickly now that he wasn't holding his breath. Zed set his spear butt against the stone floor. Then, looking upward, the guy above stopped shouting, eyes opening wide, as the tails of his shirt began to slip downward. The earth below reasserting his dominance. The light steaming off his body dwindled. He looked down and said, down at the spear tip, pointing directly at his heart. A violet fierce spring crawled out of the stone ceiling around him. The light ran out. The guard fell. He screamed as he hit the spear, impelling him through the chest. Zed let his spear fall away, carried to the ground with a muffled thump by the body twitching on its end. Sharp blade in hand, he turned down the side corridor, following the map he'd memorized. He ducked around the corner and flattened himself against the wall. Just as the troop of guards reached the dead men. The newcomer began shouting immediately, continuing the alarm. His instructions were clear: kill the king, but be seen doing it. Let the light know he was coming and what he was doing. Why? Why did Pashendi agree to this treaty, only to send an assassin the very night of his signing? More gemstones glowed on the walls of the hallway. King Gavila liked the lively display, and he couldn't know that he was leaving source of power for Zed to use in lashing. The things Zed did hadn't been seen from millennia. Histories from those times were all but non-existent. The legends were horribly inaccurate. Zed peeked back out the corridor. One of the guards at the intersection saw him, pointing and yelling. Zed made sure they got a good look, and ducked away. He took a deep breath as he ran, drawing in stormlight from the lanterns. His body came alive, and his speed increased. His muscles bursting with energy. Light became a storm inside of him, and his blood thundered in his ears. It was terrible and wonderful at the same time. 2 corridors down, one to the side, he threw open the door of a storage room, then hesitated for a moment. It was long enough for a guard to round the corner and see him before dashing into the room. Preparing for a full lashing, he raised his hand. Why do you hate Brandon Laugh? Why do you hate Brandon Sanderson? Preparing for a full lashing, he raised his arm and commanded the Stormlight to pull there, causing the skin to burst alive with radiance. Then he flung his hand out towards the door frame, spraying white luminescence across it like paint. He slammed the door just as the guards arrived. Stormlight held the door in frame with the strength of 100 arms. A full lashing bound objects together, holding them fast until the Stormlight ran out. It took longer to create, and drained Stormlight far more quickly than a basic lashing. The door handle shook, and the wood began to crack as the guards threw their weight against it, one man calling for an axe. Zed crossed the room in rapid strides, weaving around the shrouded furniture that had been stored here. It was of red cloth and deep expensive woods. He reached the far wall, and preparing himself for yet another blasphemy, he raised his sharp blade and slashed horizontally across the dark grey stone. The rock sliced easily. The sharp blade caught any inanimate object. 2 vertical slashes followed, one across the bottom, causing a large square block. He pressed his hands against it, blowing Stormlight into the stone. Behind him, the room's door began to crack. He looked over his shoulder and focused on the shaking door, lashing the block in that direction. Frost crystallized on his clothing. Lashing something so large required a great deal of Stormlight. The tempest within him stilled, like a storm reduced to a drizzle. He stepped aside. The large stone block shuddered, sliding into the room. Normally moving the block would have been impossible. Its own weight would have held it against the stone below. Yet now that the same weight pulled it free, for the block direction of the room's door was down. With a deep grinding sound, the block slid free of the wall and tumbled through the air, smashing furniture. The soldiers finally broke through the door, staggering into the room, just as the enormous block crashed into them. There's a lot of dead guards. Zed turned his back on the terrible sound of screams, splitting of woods, the breaking of bones. He ducked and stepped through his new hole, entering the hallway outside. He walked slowly, drawing Stormlight from the lamp he passed, siphoning it to him, and stoking anew the tempest within. As the lamps dimmed, the corridor darkened. A thick wooden door stood at the end. As he approached, small fierce springs shaped like globs of purple goo began to wriggle from the masonry, pointing toward the doorway. Drawn by the terrapin felt on the other side. Zed pushed the door open into the last corridor leading to the king's chambers. Tall red ceramic vases lined the pathway and were interspersed with nervous soldiers. They flanked a long narrow rug. It was red, like a river of blood. The spearmen in front didn't wait for him to get close. They broke into a trot, hitting their short throwing spears. Zed slammed his hand to the side, pushing Stormlight into the door frame. Using a third and final type of lashing, a reverse lashing. This one worked differently from the other two. It did not make the door frame emit Stormlight. Indeed, it seemed to pull nearby light into it, giving it a strange penumbra. The spearman threw, and Zed stood still, hand on the door frame. The reverse lashing required his constant touch, but took comparatively little Stormlight. During one, anything that approached him, particularly lighter objects, was instead pulled toward the lashings. was instead pulled toward the latch itself. The spear veered in the air, spinning around him and slapped into the door frame. But as he felt them hit, Zed leaped into the air and lashed himself to the right wall, his feet hitting stone with a slap. Immediately he reoriented himself. Whew. I'm getting tongue-tied. I'm gonna go get some water because my mouth is getting dry. He immediately reoriented his perspective. To his eyes, he wasn't standing on the wall. The soldiers were. The blood-red carpet streaming towards them like a long tapestry. Zed bolted down the hallway, striking with his sharp blade, shearing through the neck of two men who had thrown spears at him. The eyes burned and they collapsed. The other guards in the hallway began to panic. Some tried to attack him, others yelled for more help. Still others cringed away from him. The attackers had trouble. They were disoriented by the oddity of striking at someone who hung up on the wall. Zest cut down a few, then flipped into the air, tucking into a roll, and lashing himself back to the floor. He hit the ground in the midst of the soldiers, completely surrounded but holding the sharp blade. According to legend, the sharp blade were first carried by the Knights Radiant counted ages ago, gift of their god, granted to allow them to fight horrors of rock and flames, dozens of feet tall, foes whose eyes burned with hatred, the Voidbringers. When your foe had skin as hard as stone itself, still was useless. Something supernatural was required. Zed rose from his crouch, loose white clothes rippling, jaw clenched against his sins. He struck out. his weapons flashing with reflected torchlight. Elegant wide swings, 3 of them one after another. He seemed neither close. He could neither close his ears to the scream that followed, nor avoid seeing the men fall. They dropped around him like toys knocked over by a child's careless kick. If the blade touched the man's spine, he died, eyes burning. If it cut through the core of a limb, it killed that limb. One soldier stormed away from Zed, arm flapping uselessly on his shoulder. He would never be able to refuel or use it again. Zed lowered his sharp blade, standing among the cinder-eyed corpses. Here in Aletka, men often spoke of the legends of mankind's hard-won victory over the void brings. But when weapons created to fight nightmares were turned against common soldiers, the lives of men became cheap things indeed. Zed turned and continued on his way, slippered feet falling on the soft red rock. The sharp blade, as always, glistened silver and clean. When one killed the blade, there was no blood. That seemed like a sign. The sharp blade was just a tool, could not be blamed for the murders. The door at the empty hallway burst open. Zed froze as a small group of soldiers rushed out, ushering a man in regal robes. Zed ducked as if to avoid arrows. Soldiers wore deep blue, the color of the king's guards, and the corpses didn't make them stop and gawk. They were prepared for what a Shadowbringer could do. They opened the side door and shoved their ward through, several leveling a spear at Zed as they backed out. Another figure stepped from the king's quarters. He wore glistening blue armor made of smoothly interlocking plates. Unlike common plate armor, however, this armor had no leather or mail visible at the joints. Just smaller plates, fitting together with intricate precision. The armor was beautiful, the blue inlaid with golden bands around the edges of each piece of plate. The helm ornamented with 3 waves of small horn-like wings. Shardblade, the customary complement to a shardblade. The newcomer carried the sword as well, and a normal shardblade 6 feet long, the design along the blade like burning flames. A weapon of silvery metal that gleamed and almost seemed to glow. A weapon designed to slay dark gods, a larger counterpart to the one Zed carried. Zed hesitated. He didn't recognize armor. He had not been warned that he would set at this task. He had been given proper time to memorize the various suits of blades worn by the Alethi. But the Shardbearer would have to be dealt with before he chased the king. He could not leave such a foe behind. Besides, perhaps the Shardbearer could defeat him, kill him, and end his miserable life. His lashing wouldn't work directly on someone in Shardblade, and the armor would enhance the man, strengthen him. Zed's honor would not allow him to betray his mission or seek death. If that death occurred, he would welcome it. The Shardbearer struck, and Zed lashed himself to the side of the hallway. Able to twist and landing on the wall, he danced backward. Blade held at ready, and the Shardbearer fell into an aggressive posture, using one of the swordplay stances favored here in the east. He moved far more nimbly than one would expect for a man in such bulky armor. Shardblade was special, an ancient and magical. Shardblade was special, as ancient and magical as blades it complemented. The Shardbearer struck. Zed skipped to the side and lashed himself to the ceiling, and the Shardbearer's blade slashed into the wall. Feeling a thrill at the contest, Zed dashed forward and attacked downward with an overhand blow, trying to hit the Shadowbearer's helm. The man ducked, going down on one knee, letting Zet's blade cleave empty air. Zet lay backward as his Shadowbearer swung upward with his blade, slicing to the ceiling. Zet didn't want a set of plates himself, and didn't care to. His lashing interfered with the gemstone-powered Shadowblade, and he had to choose one or the other. As the Shadowbearer turned, Zet sprinted forward across the ceiling. As expected, the Shadowbearer swung again, and Zet leaped to the side, rolling. He came up from his roll and flicked, lashing himself to the floor again. He spun to land the ground behind the Shadowbearer. He slammed his blade into the opponent's open back. Unfortunately, there was one major disadvantage. Plate offered. It could block his Shadowblade. Zet's weapon hit solidly, causing a web of glowing lines to spread across the back of the armor, and Stormlight began to leak free from them. Shadowblades didn't dent or bend like common metal. It would have to hit the Shadowbearer in the same location at least once more to break through. Zet danced out of range as the Shadowbearer swung in anger, tried to cut at Zet's knee. The Tempest within Zet gave him many advantages, including the ability to quickly recover from small wounds, but it would not restore limbs killed by a Shadowblade. He ran the Shadowbearer, then picked the moment and dashed forward. The Shadowbearer swung again, but Zet briefly lashed himself to the ceiling for lift. He shot into the air, cresting over the swing, and immediately lashed himself back to the floor. He struck as he landed, but the Shadowbearer recovered quickly and executed a perfect follow-through strike, caught within the finger of hitting Zet. The man was dangerously skilled with that blade. Many Shadowbearers depended too much on power, the weapon and armor. This man was different. So Zet jumped to the wall and struck at the Shadowbearer with quick, tense attacks, like a snapping eel. The Shadowbearer found himself fending off with wide swing counters. His big length kept Zet at bay. This is taking too long, Zet thought. If the king clipped away into hiding, Zet would fail on his mission, not how many people he killed. He ducked in from the strike, but the Shadowbearer forced him back. Each second this fight lasted was another for the king's escape. It was time to be reckless. Zet launched into the air, lashing himself to the other end of the hallway, and falling feet first toward his adversary. The Shadowbearer didn't hesitate to swing, but Zet lashed himself down at an angle, dropping immediately. The Shadowblade swished through the air above him. He landed in a crouch, using his momentum to throw himself forward, and swung at the Shadowbearer's side, where the plates had cracked. He hit with a powerful blow, and a piece of the plate shattered, bits of molten metal streaking away. The Shadowbearer grunted, dropping to one knee, raising a hand to his side. Zet raised a foot to the man's side and shoved him backward with his Stormlight and kick. The heavy Shadowbearer crashed into the door of the king's quarters, smashing it and falling partway into the room beyond. Zet left him Talking said to the doorway to the right, following the way the king had gone. The hallway here had the same red carpet, and stormlight lamps on the wall gave Seth a chance to recharge the tempest within. Energy blazed within him again, and he sped up. If we get far enough ahead, he would deal with the king, and then turn back to fight off the Shadbra. It wouldn't be easy. A full latch on a doorway wouldn't stop a Shadbearer, but our plate would let the man run supernaturally fast. Zed glanced over his shoulder. The Shadbearer wasn't following. The man sat up in his armor, looking dazed. Zed could just barely see him, still in the doorway, surrounded by broken bits of wood. Perhaps Zed had wounded him, but in thought. Or maybe. Zed froze. He thought of the doctor head of the man who had been rushed out. Face was scared. The Shadbra still wasn't following. He was so skilled. To say that so few men could rival Kevlar Collins' sportsmanship. Could it be? Zed turned and dashed back. Trust his instinct. As soon as the Shadbra saw him, he climbed to his feet with alacrity. Zed ran faster. What was the safest place for a king? In the hands of some guards? Flynn, who protected in a suit of shadowplate, left behind dismissed as a bodyguard. Clever, Zed thought, as the family's lovely Shadbra fell onto another battle stance. Zed attacked with renewed vigor, swinging his blade in a flurry of strikes. The Shadbearer, the king, aggressively struck out with broad sweeping blows. Zed pulled away from one of these, feeling the wind of the weapon passing just inches from him. He timed his next move, then dashed forward, ducking underneath the king's follow-through. The king kicked another strike at his side, twisted his arm, held protectively to block the hole in his plate. That gave Zed the room to run past him into the king's chambers. The king came around to follow, but Zed ran through the lavishly furnished chambers, flinging out his hand and touching pieces of furniture as he passed. He infused them with stormlight, lashing them to a point behind the king. The furniture tumbled as if the room had been turned on its sides, couches, chairs, and tables dropping towards the surprised king. Kevlar made the mistake of chopping at them with a sharp blade. The one could easily shear through a large couch, but the pieces still crashed into him, making him stumble. A footstool hit him next, throwing him to the ground. Kevlar rolled out of the way of the furniture and charged forward, plate licking streams of light from the cracked sections. Zed scattered himself, then leaped into the air, lashing himself backward to the right of the king, backward and to the right, as the king arrived. He zipped out of the way of the king's blow, and lashed himself forward with two basic lashing in a row. Stormlight flashed out of him, causing him freezing, as he pulled toward the king at twice the speed of a normal fall. That's 2 Gs. The king's posture indicated surprise, as Zed lurched in midair and spun toward him, swinging. He slammed his blade into the king's helm, immediately lashing himself to the ceiling and fell upward, slamming into the stone roof above. He lashed himself in 20 directions too quickly, and his body lost track. Below, the king stepped back, Trying to get into position to swing up at Zed. The man's helm was cracked against stormlight, and he stood protectively defending the side with a broken plate. The king used the one-handed swing, reaching for the ceiling. Zed immediately lashed himself downwards, judging that the king's attack would leave him unable to get his sword back in time. Zed underestimated his opponent. The king stepped into Zed's attack, trusting his arm to absorb the blow. Just as Zed hit the arm a second time, shattering it, Kevlar punched with his offhand, slamming his gauntlet fist into Zed's face. Burning light flashed in Zed's eyes, a counterpoint to the sudden agony that crashed across his face. Everything blurred, his vision fading. Pain. So much pain. He screamed, stormlight leaving him in a rush, and he slammed back into something hard. The balcony doors. More pain broke out of his shoulders, as if someone stabbed him with 100 daggers, and hit the ground and rolled to a stop, muscles trembling. The blow would have killed an ordinary man. No time for pain. No time for pain. No time for pain. He blinked, shaking his head, the world blurry and dark. Was he blind? No, it was dark outside. It was on the wooden balcony. The force of the blow had thrown him through the doors. Ooh. Someone was stomping. Heavy footfalls. The shard bearer. Zed stumbled to his feet, vision swimming. Blood streamed from the side of his face, and stormlight rose from his skin, blinding his left eye. The lights. It would heal him if it could. His jaw felt unhinged, broken. He dropped his shard blade. A lumbering shadow moved in front of him. Shardbearer's arm had leaked enough stormlight that the king was having trouble walking. But he was coming. Zed screamed, kneeling, fusing stormlight into the wooden balcony, lashing it downward. The air forced around him. The tempest roared, traveling down his arm into the wood. He lashed it downward, then he did it again. He lashed it the fourth time when Gavlar stepped into the balcony. It lurching at the extra weight. The wood cracked, straining. The shardbearer hesitated. Zed lashed the balcony down the fifth time. That's 5 Gs. So just 5 times the weight of the balcony right now. The balcony supports shattered and the entire structure broke free from the building. Zed screamed through a broken jaw and used his final bit of stormlight to lash himself to the side of the building. He fell to the side, passing the shocked shardbearer. He hit the wall and rolled. The balcony dropped away, the king looking up with shock as he lost his footing. The fall was brief. In the moonlight, Zed watched solemnly, vision still fuzzy, blinded in one eye, as the structure crashed to the stone ground below. The walls of the palace trembled. A crash of broken wood echoed from the nearby building. Still standing on the side of the wall, Zed groaned, climbing to his feet. He felt weak. He used up his storm lights too quickly, straining his body. He stumbled down the side of the building, pushing wreckage, barely able to stand. The king was still moving. Shard plates could protect a man from such a fall, but a huge length of bloody wood stuck up through Gavlar's side, piercing him where Zed had broken the plate earlier. Zed knelt down, inspecting the man's pain-racked face, strong features, square chin, black beard flecked with white, striking pale green eyes. Gavlar calling. I expected you to come, the king said, between gasps. Zed reached underneath the front of the man's breastplate, tapping the straps there. They unfastened, and they pulled the front of the breastplate free, exposing the gemstone on its interior. 2 had been cracked and burned out, 3 still glowed. Numb, Zed put in sharply, absorbing the light. The storm began to rage again. More light rose from the side of his face. repairing the damaged skin and bones. The pain was still great. Stormlight healing was far from instantaneous. It would be hours before he recovered. The king coughed. You can tell Taidaka that it's too late. I don't know who that is, Zed said, standing, his words slurring from his broken jaw. He held his hand to the side, resummoning his sharp blade. The king frowned. Then who? Ristaris? Sadias? I never thought. My masters are the Pashendi, Zed said. 10 heartbeats passed, and his blade dropped into his hand, wet with condensation. Pashendi? That makes no sense. Gavlet coughed, hand quivering, reaching toward his chest and fumbling at a pocket. He pulled out a small crystalline sphere tied to a chain. You must take this. They must not get it. He seemed dazed. Tell my brother he must find the most important words a man can say. Gavlet felt still. Zed hesitated, then knelt down and took the sphere. So odd, like any had seen before. It was completely dark. It seemed to glow somehow, the light that was black. The Pashendi, Gavlet had said. That makes no sense. Nothing makes sense anymore, Zed whispered, tucking the strange sphere away. It's all unraveling. I'm sorry, King of the Aleti. I doubt that you care. Not anymore, at least. He stood up. At least you won't have to watch the world ending with the rest of us. Beside the king's body, a star blade materialized from mist. Fluttering to the stone now, that his master was dead. So what a fortune! Kingdoms had fallen as men vied to possess a single sharp blade. A shout of alarm came from inside the palace. Zed needed to go. But, tell my brother, to Zed's people, a dying request was sacred. He took the king's hand, dipped into the man's own blood, then used it to scroll onto the wood. Brother, you must find the most important words a man can say. With that, Zed escaped into the night. He left the king's sharp blade. He had no use for it. The blade Zed carried only was cursed enough. That was the first chapter. That was so long. God damn. The first chapter was only 3% of the book. Oh my fucking god. Anyway, for still watching or listening, thank you for listening. I am too tired to go into the next chapter. Like each chapter is an hour. Part 1. Above Silence. Alright, thank you for listening. Please subscribe if you like my reading to my Reddit account.